Hi everybody, this is Maya Good, and this is my month wrap-up and my TBR video all in one. I started to do this type of video and then just abandoned it. I am just kind of a little insecure about how much I read. I know I don't read enough. I used to read a lot and I miss it significantly. And until recently, I thought that I was just slow. I take a lot of notes, I think about what I'm reading, and I just figured, well, I'm just not a fast reader. And then I watched a video that Steve did, and he mentioned that he reads like 150 words an hour. And I was like, oh my goodness, if I could read that fast, I'd get through so many books. I think I used to read that fast when I was a kid, but I'm so slow now. And I turned on my timer, and I timed how long it took me to read. I think it was like 10 pages, and I actually do read at that speed. It's only like 2.5 pages per minute. And so there's no reason why I can't read all the books I want to read, except for the fact that I don't have reading stamina. So I have the speed, but I don't have the stamina. And I'm really going to be working over the upcoming months to build that reading stamina. I think that'll be easier than trying to get faster, just to learn to sit in one spot and not move. So the first I want to go over what I read last month. I first read A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Trembly. I did a spoiler-filled and a non-spoiler review discussion videos yesterday. And so if you're curious about that, just go ahead and click on my channel and you can listen to that video. For short stories, I'm also part of the Literary Roadhouse regular podcast, and so we read a short story a week. And for that, I read Wildwood by Junot Diaz. I read It Had to Be Murder by Cornell Woolrich, Mastiff by Joyce Oates, and what did we read today? All the Assholes in the World and Mine by Charles Bukowski. So of those short stories I read, I really enjoyed the Charles Bukowski story. I felt like it didn't have the layers and layers of depth that I'm used to reading in short stories, but the language and such beautiful descriptions, well, it's hard to call them beautiful because it wasn't describing beautiful things, but the use of language was amazing without going above really base words. And I thought his construction of language was just really fascinating. I haven't read any Charles Bukowski before, and I will definitely be reading more of him in the future. I'm very curious. Very masculine voice. I thought Hemingway was the most masculine writer I had read. But I gotta say, Charles Bukowski, very, very masculine voice, and it was enjoyable. Read Wildwood by Junot Diaz, and that was actually, I had already read that. I didn't realize it when it was picked for the podcast, because it's actually a segment that's in The Brief and Wonderful Life of Oscar Wilde, and it was one of the parts of the books that I actually enjoyed the most, and so that was really interesting. I don't necessarily like all of Junot Diaz's stuff, but I really enjoy the way he writes women. You can tell that he was raised by and has paid a lot of attention to women, and his female characters are just really amazing, and he draws them with honesty and empathy and realism in a way that was just remarkable. That particular story was one of the ones that I liked the most, for sure. It Had to Be Murder by Cornell Woolrich. That was a surprise. That story was the short story that later on became Rear Window. And considering, that movie's been remade a couple times and it's such a film classic, we assumed that, that the story itself would be fairly deep and literary in feel, even though it's a murder mystery, and actually it came across very much as a by-the-numbers murder mystery. I liked it. It wasn't my favorite story, but I did like it. It just was very surprising. And then we read Mastiff by Joyce Oates. Absolutely loved it. Over time, I liked it on the podcast, but over time, as I've let the story roll around in my head, I definitely like it even more now. I have a ton of unfinished books, and I am determined to get through at least 2 of them for November, which will be interesting because November is also National Novel Writers Month, and I'm going to be writing short stories, 50,000 words worth of short stories for November. So yeah, not only will I be writing all that, but my TBR list is a lot bigger than what I normally would put on my plate. I feel a little bit more confident now that I know what my reading speed is, and so I'm going to start scheduling my reading in 20-minute blocks. And so rather than making myself sit down for an hour, I'm going to make myself sit down for 20 minutes, kind of do like a Pomodoro method to build up my reading stamina. So the first book I want to finish for November is Writing Plots with Drama, Depth, and Heart by Roz Morris. It is a writing book, and it is it's the only writing book. I'm thinking, have I read it's the only writing book that I've read that directly addresses literary fiction. And I'm really enjoying it, but I keep putting it down for other stuff. I keep putting it down because I'm lazy. Let's call it what it is. I also want to finish The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. Definitely want to finish that. It's really good. I stopped reading it when I moved to New Orleans because I got rid of all my paper books. I didn't have a digital copy, and so tomorrow I'm going down to the library and I'm picking up the copy they have on hold for me. So I will be able to finish that, which is kind of nice. I haven't had a library card in years, and since you only can borrow books for 2 weeks, that'll force me to actually get to the books. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. Another book I'm going to be reading this week because it's going to self-destruct on me. I did an ebook borrow from the library of The 10th of December by George Saunders. We've read a couple George Saunders stories on the podcast, and I really enjoyed his writing style, and I want to understand him as a short story writer better. When I went through a collection of like 30 some odd stories of Raymond Carver, and my reading towards the end was very different of his stories than towards the beginning, just because I learned his style, I learned his voice, I was able to see the connections between the stories, and so I'm hoping that I'll have a similar experience reading 10th of December. Then for the podcast, for the book club podcast, we're reading White Light by Vanessa Garcia. I don't know anything about that book. And then we're going to have a discussion with the author, Nahaman Gobert Tahoun. I'm sure I'm butchering that name, and I'll make sure I figure out how it's pronounced before the next video. But I want to read his book before we do our conversation with him, and the book that he wrote is called The Root. So yeah, I have I have 5 books that I'm going to be trying to either read or finish for November, and I haven't read 5 books in a month in probably 5 years. So yeah, wish me luck, everybody. I'm going to need it. How I'm going to be really just trying to address November, because I have so much stuff going on. I have a lot of audio editing I'm still getting caught up on. I have a huge projects for work. I've been revising chapters of my book. I want to revise 4 chapters in November, and that's not going to count towards NaNoWriMo. I've just got a lot of stuff going on. And so what I'm doing is I'm going to be doing time blocking. And since I can't seem to sit for more than 20 minutes, a lot of my time blocking is going to be using Pomodoro method. For NaNoWriMo, because I'm doing short stories, and my short stories typically average 2,500 words to 5,000, 5,500, and most of the journals I'm going to be submitting to next year want between 2,000 and 5,000 words. So I'm just going to say my average story is about 3,000 words, so every 2 days a new story. And what I'm going to be doing in order to keep up, because I didn't get all of my story ideas or all of my outlines done for my short stories, I didn't do it. I have a list of journals I want to submit to, but I don't have ideas assigned to each one. So day 1, I'm going to write the story I want to send to Granta, and then I'm going to write that in the morning, and then in the evening I'm going to brainstorm and get ideas for the next story that's like 1 day later. And so I'm going to be kind of doing writing and interspersing outlining and writing throughout the month, and it'll be interesting to see how that works. It's going to be a lot of different ideas, a lot of different tones, a lot of different stories, all in 1 month of writing. And it's going to be a stretch for me. And I think I'll learn a lot about myself as a writer from doing that. And in order to kind of have the energy to do all of that, you know, a lot of people, when they do NaNoWriMo, they eat a lot of candy and they kind of go on like this junk food binge. I'm doing just the opposite, because if I do that, I will sleep the entire month. I won't write anything. I won't read anything. I'll just be exhausted. So I'm going to be doing the Whole30 for the month of November. Just really clean out my system, really eat lots of salads, lots of green vegetables, lots of just whole foods, and not eat anything that I'm allergic to at all. Because when I do that, I'm exhausted, and then I'm dealing with asthma symptoms and stuff all month. So that is the big one. I think between eating well with the Whole30, and along with that means no smoking. So along with, you know, taking better care of my body and time blocking, I think I can fit all of this into the month. You know, and I've scheduled out my work hours as well, which is something I haven't been doing. Since I work for myself, I tend to just work all the time or stare off into space. So I'm hoping that by doing this, I'll be able to get through the month, and maybe some of these habits and the structure and learning to write a certain number of hours a day, learning to read a certain number of hours a day, having specific hours for work can maybe be a habit that I can carry forth after November. So it's going to be a busy month for me. I'd love to hear how you guys are planning out your months. And that is my TBR wrap up and my TBR for November. Ciao.